Voters in New Hampshire will cast their ballots in the first-in-the-nation primary tomorrow. A new CBS News Battleground Tracker poll shows Senator Bernie Sanders leading the field, followed closely by former Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
This comes as Iowa's Democratic Party reveals Mayor Pete Buttigieg won the most delegates in the state's caucuses last week with 14, while Sanders received 12. CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe is in New Hampshire with more on the candidates' strategies as the Granite State's primary gets underway.
With polls opening in less than 24 hours, the candidates are now attacking each other like never before. Senator Bernie Sanders and Mayor Pete Buttigieg especially going after each other on policy and how they raise money. And former Vice President Joe Biden is trying to save his failing campaign.
This is, I think, what winning feels like.
The current frontrunners, former Mayor Pete Buttigieg and Senator Bernie Sanders, blanketed the airwaves Sunday and spent most of the day attacking each other.
You know, Pete has raised campaign contributions from over 40 billionaires.
Buttigieg hit back by criticizing Sanders' health care plan.
The plan so expensive that Senator Sanders himself freely admits he has no idea how it's supposed to be paid for.
Our CBS News poll shows Buttigieg is now leading among moderate Democrats in New Hampshire. He's stealing support away from former Vice President Joe Biden, who was first among moderates last month. That explains this Biden ad mocking the 38-year-old mayor's small city experience.
When parkgoers called on Pete Buttigieg, he installed decorative lights under bridges.
Biden also called out Buttigieg's lack of support among black voters.
We're going to have to be able to win a lot of places that, in fact, have very diverse populations. And so the assertion that he's ready across the board, I don't see it.
The voters who know me best in the African-American community, those in South Bend, are backing me.
Another moderate, Senator Amy Klobuchar, is surging in late polls.
My staff told me in the 2 days since the debate from regular people online, we raised over $3 million.
And then there's Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's also attacked Buttigieg and Biden in the past and is now calling for unity.
Look, we're going to have to bring our party together in order to beat Donald Trump. And the way we do this is not by launching a bunch of attacks on each other and trying to tear each other down.
Just like in Iowa, many New Hampshire Democrats remain undecided. Just 39% say they've definitely made up their mind. 37% say they would consider a candidate who isn't even on the ballot here. Former New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg, who's skipping the first 4 early contests. Anne-Marie and Vlad.
All right, Ed, thank you so much. Joining us now with more is CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns. So, Caitlin, we're coming down to the wire, final moments of campaigning before the primary gets underway. What are candidates doing to make that final push?
Hi, good morning. I think it's really safe to say that the knives are out here in New Hampshire. After the chaos of the Iowa caucuses, the Democratic candidates are looking to the Granite State to help firm up their support and help shape the field. And talking to voters here, they're hoping that New Hampshire can be more decisive in helping to determine who the eventual nominee of the Democratic Party will be. So that's why you've seen Bernie Sanders going after Pete Buttigieg, Pete Buttigieg going after Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden going after Pete Buttigieg for his perceived lack of experience. And you're really seeing these candidates, after having what was considered to be a pretty friendly primary process so far, really start to sharpen those attacks because they feel like New Hampshire, because of the first in the nation primary here, will help to really winnow down this field. So they're fighting about policy, certainly, but these attacks have become more personal in the closing days of this campaign.
So, Caitlin, what issues resonate most with voters there?
Well, the top issue that we're hearing from voters here in New Hampshire is what we have been hearing from voters across these battleground states, which is their number one priority is trying to find a candidate who can defeat Donald Trump. But local issues here are also factoring in. We hear climate change as a top issue for voters here. Opiate addiction is, of course, a huge issue here in New Hampshire. It was a big issue in 2016 and has continued to be so in 2020. We're also hearing questions about education, about the economy. So a variety of different issues that are affecting people locally here. We're also hearing a lot from voters about disabilities and asking candidates for their disability plans.
So you mentioned the candidates sort of attacking each other, and Pete Buttigieg is kind of being attacked for his lack of experience, but also Senator Bernie Sanders went after him for his big money donations. Not the first time we've heard that. He was speaking about Pete Buttigieg on Face the Nation. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
When you have the heads of large pharmaceutical companies contributing to your campaign, you are not going to aggressively deal with the fact that in some cases we pay 10 times more for the same exact drugs as our friends in Canada or in Europe pay. You're not going to take on the collusion and the corruption of the drug companies who are ripping us off every single day.
If somebody is ready to help us put together the campaign that's going to defeat Donald Trump, then I welcome that support, no matter how they voted in the past, no matter if they've got a lot of money or not. I want their help because, let me tell you, Donald Trump and his allies right now are doing everything they can to hold on to power.
So the conversation isn't about policies and plans and my policies are better than his policies. It's a different sort of set of attacks. Can we expect more of this, you think, in the coming weeks?
I think so, especially here in the closing hours before the primary. You know, New Hampshire voters like to tell us that they're not taking any cues from what happened in Iowa. But when you look at the polling, our CBS News Battleground Tracker shows Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg in the lead here after a close finish in Iowa. And the momentum here on the ground seems to certainly favor those two men. And they represent two different visions for the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders has been talking about galvanizing a movement. And when you look at our CBS News poll released over the weekend, he enjoys the most enthusiasm in his support among all of the contenders. And when you look at Pete Buttigieg, he has been gaining support from more moderate voters. And that's what's helped him kind of rise above Joe Biden here in New Hampshire. So that's what you're seeing kind of in their closing arguments in terms of the voters that they are targeting. It's also important to note that 42% of voters here in New Hampshire are undeclared voters, and that means that they're not affiliated with a party, so they can participate in the Democratic primary if they want to. Another number that all of these candidates are looking at is 39%. That's the number of voters that are still undecided about who they're going to support. We've talked to a lot of those voters over events over the past few days, and they say that some of them will make that decision once they get into the ballot box, but they're watching all these candidates to figure out who is most electable in their view.
So you saw as reporting, Caitlin, that in some cases voters are willing to consider somebody who's not even appearing in the state. And of course, I'm talking about former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg. Here's a question. As we have seen former Vice President Biden's support among Democrats, if you look at the numbers in Iowa, if you look at the numbers in the polling that's being done right there in New Hampshire, that support has eroded over the past couple of months. If you look at our CBS News polls back in December versus where they are today, his support has eroded. And so I wonder if that continues. You've got a guy who was a vice president to one of the most popular Democratic presidents. If you're a Democrat, you love President Obama. The name recognition is there. Same thing for Senator Sanders. He's been around for quite a long time. And now you've got Michael Bloomberg creeping up. Could he potentially rain on the parade that you're seeing in New Hampshire in the months that follow at some of the other primaries and caucuses?
Well, the one thing that Michael Bloomberg has that a lot of these other campaigns don't is a lot of money, a lot of his own money. And that's been able to keep him on the airwaves everywhere in the U.S. practically, not only just in key battleground states, but he is spending money organizing, building up an infrastructure, and advertising. You can't watch TV these days without seeing an ad for Michael Bloomberg. I've certainly seen that here in New Hampshire and other places that we've been reporting on the ground. And so that is certainly a factor. But we haven't yet seen Michael Bloomberg on a debate stage. That could change because in the Nevada debate next week, the DNC is changing the requirements. Not having the donor threshold that they've had before. Michael Bloomberg hasn't been taking in grassroots donations. He's been funding his own campaign, but these rules changes could potentially allow him to be on that stage, and that could potentially change the dynamic. You've heard Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and others go after Michael Bloomberg for being a billionaire, for spending all his money in this race, but he is certainly a factor here and definitely getting the attention of Donald Trump, who will be here in New Hampshire tonight.
Yeah, I guess, Bloomberg's a bit of a conundrum because how do you campaign against someone who isn't kind of fully in the race with you yet. You know what I mean? It's like campaigning against a ghost. But there is another billionaire who's taking an alternative route as well. It's Tom Steyer. He's out of New Hampshire. He's moving on to, I think, is it North Carolina, South Carolina? What's your take on that strategy?
Right, skipping New Hampshire and going right to South Carolina, which goes fourth in this process, the fourth primary later this month. South Carolina is a place that Tom Steyer has started to really build up a significant infrastructure. He's been on the ground there. South Carolina is also where Joe Biden is really focusing his efforts. So you heard him today and over the past few days, Joe Biden really lowering expectations here in New Hampshire after taking what he called a gut punch in Iowa. And that's because he feels, his campaign feels, he can do better in states that are more diverse, especially in South Carolina, where he has very strong support among African American voters, which of course is a key constituency in the Democratic primary and beyond. And so that's where Joe Biden has been focusing. But there is this question for him, for others who have been kind of going all in on those states. If they can't make it through with any sort of victory in the first two early states, does that diminish their prospects in the states in which they really do want to compete? That's something we're going to be keeping a close eye on. And of course, Super Tuesday, where Mike Bloomberg is really focusing his efforts, that comes in March. Again, a more diverse electorate. You have California and Texas. Can he get to that point, and does that change the dynamic? A lot of these candidates, that's what's fueling their campaigns, that there are still plenty of contests to go.
So, Caitlin, I know we got to wrap this up, but that is sort of interesting to me. I mean, I note that the headline in the Charlotte Observer is this: cracks have begun to appear in Joe Biden's Carolina firewall. In other words, sort of saying, look, even if that is his firewall, numbers are falling there. And frankly, to your earlier point in our discussion, if what Democrats are looking for is somebody who can beat Donald Trump, and over the course of the past couple of months, the former vice president's numbers have continued to slide, maybe for some Democrats, a Bloomberg candidacy does look appealing because the president is clearly worried about Bloomberg. He keeps tweeting about him more than the other candidates. He is a billionaire. I know that for people who support Senator Sanders and Senator Warren, that could be potentially a problem. But if you look at that same argument about being a billionaire was lobbied at candidate Trump, and the people who make up the backbone of the Republican Party ultimately voted him into office. His supporters don't mind that he's a billionaire, so he says. So this could be a problem for some of the Democrats.
It certainly could, and that's the question for Joe Biden as well, because he's been campaigning as someone who is the most electable in this race, who can win back voters that went for Obama before, then switched to Trump. But Pete Buttigieg is arguing that when you look at the results in Iowa, he's the one that converted some of those supporters, or at least did well in those districts, that those precincts that flipped. So this continues to be a question for Joe Biden, and that's why we're looking beyond New Hampshire. And that's why voters, even here in New Hampshire, I had one voter yesterday tell me that he's looking for someone who can do well in the later states. So more strategists and mini pundits we have on the ground here than your average voters.
All right.
All right, Caitlin, thank you so much.